Oh, great songs. Your voices sound really, really rich this morning. As Bob said, this is Holy Week, and I'm glad that we can talk about that. I've been in churches before where you didn't talk about it. You could talk about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus every Sunday, and we did that, but we kind of downplayed it during Easter because we had to be different from everybody else. And that's a sad thing. You know, we don't know when Jesus was born, what time of year it was, but we know the time of year that he died because Passover is a season that God established and we know when it happened. This is the time of year that Jesus died. So, when people today tell me, well, we celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection every Sunday, I tell them I'm happy for them. And then I ask, I'm like, do you love your wife every day of the year? And I say, well, of course I do. And they say, so you get to skip your anniversary? No, it's a special time. So you give it even special heightened awareness. You don't want to, if you didn't love your wife during the year and then you just gave her something on her anniversary, that would be different. But yes, we can celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection every day of our lives, every Sunday. But this time of year, I think it's important that we spend extra time focusing on what he has done for us. And then you may say, well, why are we in the plagues during this time? I hope it'll be clear by the time we get to the end today or at least by next week. We're talking about the plagues of locusts and darkness in Exodus chapter 10. I've got a good portion of Exodus 10 in the bulletin. It wouldn't all fit, so I hope you'll go read the entire text this week and take it all in. I'll be reading along with what is in the bulletin. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am the Lord. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, and they said to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground so that you cannot see it. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in your fields. They will fill your houses and those of all your officials and all the Egyptians, something neither your parents nor your ancestors have ever seen from the day they settled in this land until now. Then Moses turned and left Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's officials said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they can worship the Lord their God. Don't you realize that Egypt is ruined? Then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. Go and worship the Lord your God, Pharaoh said, but tell me, who will be going? And Moses answered, we will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and herds, because we are to celebrate a festival to the Lord. And Pharaoh said, the Lord be with you. If I let you go along with your women and children, clearly you are bent on evil. No, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you've been asking for. Then Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made an east wind blow across the land all that day and all that night. By the morning, the wind had brought the locust. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit of the trees. Nothing green remained on tree or plant in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron, and he said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now forgive my sin once more and pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me. Moses then left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord changed the wind to a very strong east wind, which caught up the locusts and carried them into the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky so that darkness spreads over Egypt, darkness that can be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else or move about for 3 days. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. I am convinced that God did not just randomly throw plagues at Egypt. I think each one was strategically planned to make a point to attack something that they relied on or some god that they worshiped. And as God told Moses, he wants the people, the Israelites, he wants the Egyptians, and he wants the rest of the world to know who he is. And this succession of plagues that he sends, the order that he sends them in, their timing, and the timing of their removal, they were all designed for God to show his people and the Egyptians and the rest of the world who he is. And so these two plagues that we're looking at today, plagues number 8 and 9. After the hail, Moses and Aaron come before Pharaoh, and they speak really boldly to Pharaoh. How long are you going to refuse to humble yourself before God? Recognize who he is and surrender. The devastation around him is so complete that Pharaoh's officials even say to him, "How long are you going to keep falling into his trap? Let the people go. Egypt is ruined." Nobody would have talked to Pharaoh like this at the beginning of the plagues, but things have gotten so far that they are speaking boldly because the situation is desperate. And so Pharaoh gives in a little bit and he says, "Okay, go ahead and take the people, but just who all is going to go?" And Moses says, "Everybody, all young, old, even our animals. We're going to take everyone." And Pharaoh says, "No, just the men." He tries to negotiate. So God sends the locusts so thick that they cover the ground to where you couldn't see it. And once again, Pharaoh relents. But after God removes the locusts just in time as he said he would, he also hardened Pharaoh's heart. He would not let the people go. And so plague number 9 comes along, and just like every other third plague, plague number 3 and plague number 6, it's unannounced. Darkness comes over all of Egypt. God himself said it's going to be a darkness that you can feel. You ever been in a place that dark? I remember in the Air Force going through some physiology training, and they had us in dark rooms to teach us things about night vision and how we use our rods in our retina at night, and we use the cones for color, and they taught us different things. That was a pretty dark room, but the darkest place I've ever been in was in a cavern. I can't remember if it was Natural Bridge Caverns in the Hill Country or the Caverns of Sonora, or if maybe it was in both places. I've been in both of them. Get way down deep in the caverns, and the lights are on the little sidewalks and trails, and they get everybody situated in one place, and then they turn the lights off. It gives me chills thinking about it now. It's the darkest you can ever imagine. If you've never experienced that, it's creepy. If they leave you in that darkness long enough, you will lose your sight. You will go blind. I mean, they found little lizards and creatures down there that have little recessed sockets where their eyes used to be, but they didn't use their eyes for so long that they're gone. And they don't use them anymore. It's a darkness so thick you can feel it. The lights were off for maybe a minute, and I was getting, a little creepy. I can't imagine that kind of darkness for 3 days. It must have been maddening. The people can't see anybody right next to them. We couldn't see our hand in front of our face in those caverns. They were in the same kind of darkness. They can't go anywhere. But the land of Goshen, where the Hebrews were, was unaffected. Now, this is a miracle in and of itself right here. Think about this. If we lost all power in Buffalo Gap at night, there's no lights at all, we're going to see a glow from Abilene. And that's a pretty good distance. Goshen was closer to Egypt than that, and there's light in Goshen, but that light did not penetrate into Egypt where Pharaoh and his officials were. That is a miracle in and of itself. It's an amazing thing. The Hebrew people, the Jewish people, are unaffected by this, and yet Pharaoh and his officials are in total black darkness. Darkness so thick you can feel it. Darkness that makes people lose their sanity. And so Pharaoh summons Moses one more time. He tries to negotiate again. He says, go worship, but leave your flocks and your herds behind. I can only guess that Pharaoh wanted this to be like a security deposit for their return. He knew that if they didn't come back for they would come back definitely for their cattle and their animals. They would be lost in the desert without them. So he wants to hang on to them. But Pharaoh is rebuffed by Moses. Moses says, not a hoof will be left behind. We're taking every person, every animal. And God hardens Pharaoh's heart again. He refuses to let the people go, and he tells Moses to never show his face again. And this sets up the final plague that we will look at next week, the plague of the blood on the doorposts and the Passover of the angel of death. Now, as we read through Exodus, I think it's important. I've learned so much this time going through and reading and studying and reading what other people say about the plagues and about the Egyptians and about the Hebrews. One thing that we have to remember is, I guess I had this notion in my head of Pharaoh being an atheist. But we have to remember the Egyptians were not atheists at all. They were the opposite. They were polytheists. They believed in multiple gods. They had dozens of them. They don't know about the one true God, the God of the Hebrews, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but they definitely believed in their gods. They had a God for just about everything. And when something was wrong in their lives, they appealed to the appropriate God. Got a bad crop? Well, there's a God for that. Sounds kind of like, there's an app for that nowadays. Too much sun, not enough sun, there's a God for that. Trying to have a child, conceive a child, there's a God for that. You have conceived a child and it's time for childbirth, there's a different God for that. And on it goes. And anytime there was something wrong, they felt like, okay, we're on the wrong side of that particular God. So they would talk to that God, pray to that God, offer a sacrifice to them. They definitely believed in little g gods. It's important to remember because after the plague of frogs, the second plague, when Pharaoh says, pray to the Lord to take the frogs away, and after the fourth plague, the plague of flies, when Pharaoh says, now pray for me, neither of those is an acknowledgement of God as the one true God and creator, the God as we know him. No, it's just Pharaoh acknowledging, okay, there's another God that I didn't know about. This God's got some power over frogs. This God's got a power over flies. I just talk to that God for me, your regional God, the God of your people, and appease that God for me. And I learned something else. When the magicians, after the plague of gnats, the number 3 plague, when they said, this is the finger of God, I took that to be that, okay, they're beginning to recognize God as the one true God. But a rabbi that I read, a modern day rabbi, says if you look at the Hebrew closely, basically what those officials and magicians of Pharaoh were saying is, one of the gods is angry at you. You've just angered one of the many gods that are out there. And so this is not anything we can replicate. This is a real thing, but it's from one of the little g gods out there. And so how do we best appease that God? We'll have someone talk to it. If it's a regional God that belongs to those Hebrews, have those Hebrews talk to this God and see if they can reason with it. And that's why Pharaoh asked Moses to pray. You see, Pharaoh was a king, and he had some powers, and they considered him to be a god. And the Egyptian little g gods had some power over little things, one aspect or two of their lives. And they were kind of considered like a neighboring king. They had power like Pharaoh had power. And again, this is all in the Egyptians' minds. And they had to be negotiated with every once in a while. And occasionally they had to be appeased. But these little g gods were not above Pharaoh. Pharaoh saw himself on the same level. But this God is beginning to look a little different. Moses keeps telling Pharaoh when and how these plagues are going to occur and when they will go away. And every time he does, he is exactly right. And he tells Pharaoh when the Hebrews are going to be spared from the plagues, and it happens every time just as Moses predicts. This Hebrew God, Pharaoh was beginning to see, seems to have dominion over everything, not just a few things here and there, but he even has dominions over the gods, the little g gods, that they thought had control of certain aspects of their lives. Pharaoh's view of the Hebrew God, if you read through these plagues carefully and watch how he reacts, his view of the Hebrew God is beginning to change. He seems to be getting closer to understanding who God really is. How do we know that? Well, words mean things. And in the past, Pharaoh has recognized that he is on the wrong side of one of these gods, or at least that's what he thinks. But after the plague of hail, everything takes a dramatic change, a shift. It's a tipping point, if you will. Because after the plague of hail, Pharaoh says, "This time I have sinned." This time I have sinned. That's a difference. You could anger the gods of Egypt, you could get on the wrong side, but you could negotiate with them. But when it comes to sin, we can only sin against Creator God, the one true God, our Creator. I'm reminded of this in Psalm 51. After David is called on his sin of adultery with Bathsheba, called on for the sin of murdering Uriah the Hittite, her husband, David wrote Psalm 51, a psalm of penitence that I love very much. And in that psalm, David says to God, "I have sinned against you and you alone." Because sin is only against God. I can do wrong to you or against you, but I cannot sin against you. The sin is against God. David sinned when he committed adultery. David sinned when he committed murder. He did Bathsheba wrong. He did Uriah the Hittite wrong, but his sin was against God. Now Pharaoh seems to be recognizing that there is a higher power than him, and he has wronged that person. He has sinned against that person. When Pharaoh asked Moses to pray for a plague to be removed, he's only recognizing God as having some dominion over one thing. It fit right in with this polytheistic view of the world. It was as if he were negotiating with one of those neighboring kings, trying to appease them, make a deal with them. But now, Pharaoh is seeing the Hebrew God as not just a little g God, but something much more. He is beginning to recognize that the Hebrew God is above him, that he is sovereign, that we've talked about for so long. This God has authority, real authority, even over Pharaoh, even over nature and all of creation. And when Pharaoh has that realization, it means that he is duty-bound to obey him. And if Pharaoh continues on this path to hold the people as slaves, he is defying this supreme authority that he is just beginning to learn about. He isn't just angering some neighboring king, he is committing a sin against his creator, the one true God. And that changes everything. He can no longer claim ignorance. And we know that ignorance is never an excuse. But once we come to the realization of who we are and who God is, and we realize that we're not just doing things our way, but we're sinning against him, everything changes. In 2 Peter 2, Peter says, and he's talking about people who learn the truth about Jesus, and they still choose to do their own thing. He says, it would have been better for them to have never known the way of righteousness than to have known it and then turn their backs on the sacred command that was passed on to them. So how does this apply to Pharaoh? Before Pharaoh recognized who God is, he was still in the wrong, no doubt, but his resistance and his disobedience was based on ignorance. But once Pharaoh sees and understands that God is the one true God, the Creator, that changed everything. When he resists now, when he refuses to obey, he is openly defying the one true God. And that changes everything. When he resists, when he refuses to obey, he is defying God, and that carries a different responsibility, a different weight, and it will suffer a higher penalty. And so from the plague of hail on, Pharaoh isn't resisting in his mind. He's not resisting just some regional god, some little g God. He is resisting, and he knows it. He is resisting the creator of everything. He knows he is sinning. And I think that is exactly why God chose darkness for the ninth plague. Before you knew the truth about God, you were living life your way. Now, you might have been an adult and not known the truth, and you were living life your own way. But once you learn the truth, somebody sat you down and talked to you about God and Jesus and how this all fits into life and what it means to you, everything changed. You could no longer say, well, I just want to keep on living my way and doing things my way. You could do that, but now you recognize that that is a sin. It's not just living in ignorance, it is a sin. Maybe you were a child and you didn't know right from wrong, but once you were old enough to understand right from wrong and to differentiate the two and to know that there is a God who created you and that you were a sinner, you were no longer free to just go your own way. You knew that living that way was choosing to sin against God. And willfully sinning against God, like Pharaoh did, willfully sinning against God if you chose to go on living the life that you lived even before you knew the truth, separates each one of us from the light and leaves us in a very dark place. It's just the truth. Sin separates us from the light and leaves us in darkness. And it is a darkness so thick you can feel it. We were created for fellowship with God, and when we sin, that fellowship is broken immediately and completely. It can no longer happen. We can't be in the presence of God. He can't be in our presence because He is holy and we are not. That's why Peter fell down and said, "Get away from me, Jesus, I am a sinful man." We are cut off from that light. We are left in darkness, and our souls feel it. We ache and yearn for that presence. And it leaves us with a choice. We either continue in our sin, we try to fill in the emptiness in our souls with the things of the world, or we surrender to God and His offer to bring us back out of slavery, out of darkness, and into the light. And that's only through Jesus. It's the only way back. Pharaoh never surrendered to God, and some people never do. Or some people will surrender initially, but they'll revert back to their old ways. And the people of Israel are guilty of this, as we'll see as we go on. But our surrender is not just a one-time thing. It is a continuous act. We offer our bodies daily as living sacrifices. We deny ourselves and we choose to walk in the light. And choosing to walk in the light, 1 John says, we are blessed with the fellowship of Him as we do that. And the light of Jesus continually cleanses us from our sins. Next week, we're going to be in that final plague, the one that saved the Jews and holds so much significance, not just for Jews, but for anyone who wants to be in fellowship with God again. It's a plague about blood. It's a plague about being saved, and it's a plague about death. And it gives us so much hope. Until then, we, I think, from this lesson today and from these two plagues, need to remember every day who God really is. He isn't just someone that we appeal to when we need some help. He's not one that we just go to when we're in trouble and say, "Bail me out again, Lord." He isn't someone we can negotiate with as we try to do things our way and mix things in a little bit of this and a little bit of you. No, He isn't just some higher power with some control over certain things. He is the one true God, our Creator, Lord of Lords, and King of Kings. And it's up to us to surrender our lives to Him completely and wholly. We're going to sing a song. It's a time of reflection and response. I hope it gets us thinking, and we continue to think as we go throughout this very special week. But if you need anything, any help in the way of study, or would like to put Jesus on in baptism to step into that light, we invite you to come while we stand and sing, please.